Of all Irish myths, the legend of the cattle raid is the most mysterious. It tells of a ruthless warrior queen and a bloodthirsty quest for power. But it is more than just a violent fairy tale. It holds the key to an ancient world. Long ago, the land of Connacht in the west of Ireland was ruled by Maeve, a proud and fearsome warrior queen. One night, as she and her king lay together in bed, they began to compare riches. Both had great wealth, but even when scribes and accountants were summoned to the royal chamber, it seemed that they were equal in all things, except for one. The king's magic white bull. According to the laws of the time, all marriages were controlled by the wealthier partner. But Maeve had vowed never to yield her power, so she set out to find an even greater treasure for herself. Queen Maeve knew that the men of Ulster owned such a prize, a magical brown bull, said to be the most valuable in all Ireland. But when her offer of great riches for the animal was refused, Maeve vowed she would take it by force. In her heart, the queen knew she could never defeat Ulster's proud warriors in battle. But then, news arrived that they had fallen under a magic spell. An ancient curse declared that when Ulster was attacked, its men would be overcome by the pangs of childbirth, helpless to defend themselves. The agony, it was said, would last not hours or days, but months. And while the curse lasted, the magic bull lay unprotected. So calling her warriors together, Maeve advanced on Ulster. One warrior alone stood between Maeve and her prize, a tall, muscular youth called Cuchulainn. As he was only 17 and not yet a man, he was unaffected by the curse which afflicted his countrymen. So he alone guarded the gateway to Ulster, a narrow river ford here at Cooley, the Gap of the North. As her warriors reached the river ford, the warrior queen looked down from her horse and laughed at the mere boy who stood against her mighty army. Quickly she dispatched one of her men to cut the youth into ribbons so that her forces could march onward into Ulster. But Cuchulainn was no ordinary warrior. His great strength, his deadly aim, and his mastery of many weapons made him a terrible foe. In the blink of an eye, Maeve's champion lay dead. Others followed, but again and again the bravest of her warriors fell beneath Cuchulainn's sword. Finally, Maeve commanded her troops to attack in force, but once more, she had underestimated her foe. A mortal of supernatural birth, Cuchulainn possessed the power of the warp spasm, a magical force which rendered him grotesque to look at, but invincible in battle. As Maeve's warriors approached, they watched as the hideous transformation began. One of Cuchulainn's eyes shrank to the size of a pinhead, while the other bulged insanely from his skull. His hair rose into razor-sharp spikes. His bones and muscles twisted and contorted beneath his skin until he became a monstrous ogre filled with rage. and hungry for slaughter. With a blood-curdling roar, Cuchulainn charged forward, wielding his great battle axe with such madness and fury that the mutilated bodies of Maeve's warriors soon lay 6 deep at his feet. And so, legend records that battle as the Sixfold Slaughter. At first, Maeve commanded her army with honor, rallying her troops and praising their bravery. But as the days turned to weeks and the weeks to months, she became desperate. She taunted, threatened, even seduced her warriors into battle, only to see each one butchered by the mighty Cuchulainn. Finally, Maeve resorted to treachery. Leaving the battlefield, she sought out Cuchulainn's beloved foster brother and lied to him. Cuchulainn, she said, had dismissed him as a coward and a weakling. Now he was forced to fight for his honor, brother against brother. They were, it was said, equally matched in strength and skills. A duel between them would be a fight to the death. And Maeve knew that even if Cuchulainn survived, he would be too weak to defend himself against her army, and victory would be hers. Soon, as the Queen had planned, the brothers faced one another on the field of combat. For 3 days, they fought like wild animals. Sparks flew from their swords. The air was filled with blood and sweat. Secretly, each night, they tended each other's wounds. Each morning, their savage conflict began again. But on the 4th day, as the dust of battle cleared, Maeve's champion lay dead, cradled in the arms of his sorrowful brother. With Cuchulainn distracted by grief, Maeve readied her forces to charge through the gap of the north. But suddenly, a thick mist filled with thunder and lightning rose up. It was the army of Ulster, finally released from their curse. So great was their number, it was said, their breath formed a mist. The pounding of their feet echoed like thunder. Their weapons flashed like lightning. With a terrifying roar, the 2 armies clashed. Cuchulainn fighting on one side, Maeve herself on the other. The carnage was immense. Corpses littered the battlefield. The air echoed to the sound of splitting bone and the clash of metal. In one blow, Maeve's spear killed 100 men. But at the height of battle, she came face to face with Cuchulainn. As the Queen began to plead for her life, Cuchulainn dismissed her. "I do not kill women." But the deafening clash of swords and shields had driven the magic brown bull into Maeve's camp. And as her army fled from the slaughter, they drove the bull ahead of them. According to legend, as Maeve approached her homeland, the brown bull of Ulster charged forth to fight the white bull of Connacht. All night, both armies looked on as the great beasts struggled. The ground heaved and split as they lunged and spun around, locked together in fury. Blood spilled across the soil as they gored and slashed at one another with their mighty hooves and horns. At dawn, the bloodiest battle in the history of Ireland had come to a bitter end. Both magical bulls lay dead. And so the tale ends. But what does it mean? Could the saga of Cuchulainn and Maeve be more than just a legend? The Táin Bó Cúailnge, the bloody battle between Maeve, the warrior queen, and the mighty Cuchulainn, is the oldest and most infamous legend in Irish mythology. It has been told and retold by generations of storytellers. But did it ever happen? And what could it mean? The legend is enshrined in the 800-year-old manuscript where it was first written down, the Book of Leinster. The book is a national treasure. It records the legends of a remarkable time. Its pages speak of kings and great dynasties, ferocious battles and mysterious supernatural powers. Since the medieval era, it has fascinated and intrigued all who read it. But though the book itself dates from the 12th century, the legends it contains, including the Táin Bó Cúailnge, the Battle of Cuchulainn and the Warrior Queen, belong to another time. A time as ancient to 12th century writers as the Middle Ages are to us now. They were the heroic tales of the Celts, a civilization whose legacy can still be felt in Ireland today.
Why do we think of Ireland to this day as such a great Celtic place, such a distinctively Celtic, almost republic? The reason for that is that the Romans never got to Ireland, so we are not a Romanized country like the Celts in Britain become completely Romanized. Irish history is about cattle, so that the whole idea of raiding cattle, the whole idea of the Táin Bó Cúailnge, Queen Maeve, that completely is Celtic. Even though that's legend and myth and all the rest of it, there is in all of that a faint echo of historical, social, cultural fact of the time around Christ, when the Celts were at the height of their culture in Ireland.
It was a time when cattle were the ultimate expression of wealth and status. Celtic chieftains would go to any lengths, and countless wars were fought for control of the greatest herds. In the mythology of the Celts, cattle were also given a place of honor. Like the magical bulls of legend, they were more than simply mortal creatures.
Bulls were introduced into the epic because they dramatized it. The great opposition of the dark bull and the white bull, fighting it out, if you like, as a sort of a subplot to the main battle. And these two bulls have divine names. One of them is called Down, the dark one, who was the god of the dead, and the other is called Fionn, the bright, wise one, who was the god of light.
From the ferocious weapons which have survived from their time, we know the Celts also glorified their warriors. They lived to fight. Even in peace, they revelled in epic tales of mortal combat and past glories. And yet, for over 1,000 years, not one of these tales was ever written down. All Celtic knowledge was preserved in the memory of the Filii, or bards, the storytellers of their day. But even though the Celts did not write the chronicle of their time, others did. From the written accounts of Roman historians and later Christian scribes, we know that Ireland was made up of fierce, independent dynasties. History records many great struggles for power and sovereignty among the Irish Celts. The legendary Battle of Maeve and Cuchulainn may have been one such struggle.
The question of whether there ever was such a war as the cattle raid of Cooley is an interesting one. I think there was a war onto which these mythical figures became attached in storytelling, because the Celts, the Celtic kingdom of East Ulster, was in about the 4th century AD overthrown by a Celtic kingdom from the Midlands. And this war, I think, is the basis of the tradition of the epic.
And yet, even though the legend may have had an actual historical counterpart, the events it describes seem just too outlandish to be true. Could there be any truth behind Cuchulainn's fearsome transformation in battle? Could the legendary violence and magic of the tale be anything other than pure myth? With its magical beasts and superhuman warriors, the ancient legend of Cuchulainn and the warrior queen seems to belong more to the world of the imagination than history. In a way, this is true. Celtic art is one of Ireland's most enduring legacies, but its spirals and strange, abstract designs speak of a people who are more interested in fantasy than reality. In their storytelling, too, the Celts took very little at face value. In their great hero tales, the Celtic bards preserved myth as well as history. And so, like Cuchulainn, the heroes themselves were often part mortal and part supernatural. Cuchulainn, as the legend goes, had the power to transform into a terrifying creature, bloodthirsty in battle and demented with rage. His muscles were said to twist and warp beneath his skin as he became an invincible, misshapen killer. This, it was said, was a magical power known as the warp spasm.
The fighting Celts are supposed to have been phenomenal fighters, and I mean, that tradition goes on in the modern mythology of our own time, where the Irish in the Union Army and all of that in America and all of that, the Fighting 69, all have a great reputation. A lot of that could be exaggerated, but certainly the classical writers like Posidonius, writing in the 1st century BC, he describes the Celts as going into battle naked to the world. Sometimes their bodies, by the way, weren't fully naked. They were painted in kind of blue woad or whatever to make them look fearsome.
According to Roman records, these Celtic warriors would work themselves into demented blood frenzies before entering battle. Showing no fear, they fought like wild animals, and always to the death. This is what the legendary warp spasm of Cuchulainn celebrates. But whether the magical warrior was a myth or an historical fact, we may never know. Like the figure of its great hero, the truth behind the legend has always been elusive. Over the centuries, the saga of the cattle raid has been interpreted in many ways. After it was written down, some believed that the events it described spoke of the present as well as the past.
This great story served two functions in the Middle Ages. First of all, the chieftains, who were often fighting small little wars against each other and raiding each other's cattle, they liked to think that they were like the great heroes of old in the great cattle raid. They liked to flatter themselves that their deeds were warlike and that they were great men. Also, the learned caste and the poets liked to tell a story like this because it gave them the illusion that they had an epic to be compared with the epics of the Greeks, like the Iliad and the Odyssey. That just as the Greeks had Ulysses and Hercules, that the Irish poets had Cuchulainn and Maeve.
Like Cuchulainn, the figure of Maeve could have been based on fact. Celtic women were notoriously warlike, and according to history, many shared the same aggressive instincts and political power as their men. But still, the warrior queen is an enigma. In the legend of the cattle raid, she is described as the Queen of Connacht, a title which once existed. Yet outside the legend, history makes no mention of her. So who or what could have inspired the creation of such a formidable woman? Maeve, the warrior queen, is still one of the most mysterious figures of Irish legend. Even though history proves the existence of many female warriors among the Celts, no reference has ever been made to the great Queen of Connacht. In fact, it is not the history, but the religion of the Celts that holds the key to her identity. As pagans, the Celts worshipped a great hierarchy of gods and goddesses. These spirits presided over warfare. They controlled the forces of nature and held sway over the fertility of the land. One supernatural being, however, governed the most important ritual of the Celtic world. The seat of her power, it was believed, was not Connacht, but the royal precinct of Tara, the most important ritual site in Celtic Ireland. She was the goddess of kingship, and without her blessing, no warrior could be elected as ruler of his people. The name of this goddess was Maeve. Many claim that she and the legendary warrior queen were one and the same.
Well, the type of person that Maeve was is very interesting. Her name, first of all, meant she who intoxicates. It's the same word as you have in mead for drink. And Maeve was really the goddess of sovereignty, the goddess of the land. The land of Ireland was seen by ancient people as being female, a woman. And when the king was being installed, the ritual was that he was to become the husband of the lady land. And as her husband, he had to look after the country.
After the 5th century, with the coming of Christianity and the written language of Latin, many Celtic legends were preserved in manuscript form for the first time. But first, they had to be adapted for a Christian audience. The pagan gods were too important to the Irish to be banished completely, yet too powerful a threat to the Christian doctrine. So they were demoted from spirits to perishable mortals, with human powers and human weaknesses.
When the medieval writers began to write up the epics into great personalities like Maeve and Cnachur and the rest of them, they of course wanted to dramatise her. So this dim memory of a woman who caused great wars and great contentions, she was turned into a sort of virago, a woman who was crazy for power.
No longer worshipped as a goddess, Maeve came to represent an entirely different female symbol, conniving and unscrupulous, responsible for the death of her men. In effect, the medieval Christian writers had cast her in the role of Eve to Cuchulain's Adam, once again laying the blame for humanity's downfall at the feet of a woman.
The myth of Maeve and Cuchulain are myth, but they probably are reasonable echoes of events that took place maybe around the time of Christ or slightly before. We know, for instance, that the great mythological site of the kings of Ulster was at Owenmucha in South Armagh. We know that site to be there to this day. As archaeologists, we have excavated that site, and we know that there was a huge, gigantic wooden temple there.
2,000 years ago, it was believed that Maeve's spirit inhabited the whole island of Ireland. To the Celts, she was the goddess of the land itself. In Ireland, even now, her memory is surrounded by superstition. One ancient folktale claims that her soul rests inside an ancient Celtic grave, here at Knocknaree, in County Sligo. But according to the legend of the cattle raid, the centre of her power was here, the Celtic temple of Cruachan, in the heart of Connacht. Beneath this ancient mound, it is said, lies her tomb. But the truth, like her legend, is shrouded in mystery. Because to this day, no one has dared disturb this land.